24 states, including Oklahoma, allow the death penalty. 23 states have abolished it, and 3, California, Oregon, and Pennsylvania, currently have moratoriums in place halting executions in those states. Oklahoma's moratorium on the death penalty ended in October of 2021, and since then, 10 prisoners have been put to death by lethal injection. Now lawmakers are studying a proposal to reinstate the moratorium, and that's the topic of this week's in-depth discussion with moderator Cassidy Mudd.
Thank you, Rich. Today we're joined by Brett Farley, who is the Executive Director for the Catholic Conference of Oklahoma, and via Zoom, Representative Justin Humphrey, who is joining us from the Capitol. Thanks, guys, for being here. Let's get right down to the discussion on the possible moratorium on the state's death penalty. As you guys both may know, there's an interim study this week which takes a look about the possibility of another moratorium for Oklahoma. I want to just kind of hear your thoughts on what that might look like, and this comes just a few years after the previous one was lifted. Representative Humphrey, can we start with you?
Absolutely. I just want to say that right now I'm on board with the moratorium, but I do want to hear more. We've been very, instrumental in the Rich Glossop case, and we've learned that DAs not only destroyed evidence purposely, but actually changed testimony, which is illegal. Both of those would be illegal. Withheld evidence. It's just grossly criminal what they did. They put this guy up for death row when they had really zero evidence. So again, after seeing that, I've started looking at several death cases. There's 2 that really interest me. I went back and asked for an extra DNA to be ran on one. They just executed that person. Based on what I've been told, I think that probably was the correct thing to do. But at the end of the day, do I have questions, and should we start questioning the accountability of our government and the court system? I think that we have to. I think that it's very important. So again, this is not an easy question to answer, but I think we all need to hear all the sides and keep an open mind.
All right, Mr. Farley, if you would like to follow.
Yeah, I think we need to pull back and look at the bigger picture as well. After the first moratorium was instituted in 2015, the Death Penalty Review Commission was convened, and after a year of intense research, they produced an almost 300-page report that identified more than 40 problems with the death penalty in Oklahoma that needed to be corrected before it could be reinstituted. Virtually none of those have been addressed by state leaders at all, so we've got a serious problem here. I think it's also important to recognize that we have now 11 exonerees that have been on death row, some of which already had execution dates scheduled, now found innocent. The most recent of which is Glenn Simmons, who had been on death row for almost half a century before charges were dropped. We've got severe problems here that need to be corrected, and that's why we're requesting a moratorium.
And I agree with Brett. And again, Brett, you do know that there was a couple of representatives that did try to take that. So me and Kevin McDougal,
yes,
Representative McDougal, did try to we even had a study on that study to try to introduce legislation. We tried multiple times, 3 to 4 times, to get some of that legislation introduced, and we have met great resistance, basically through the former AG's office and the district attorney's office.
Okay. Mr. Farley, some victims are looking for justice and closure through these executions. How would you approach them in discussing a moratorium or elimination on the death penalty?
Well, I think the first point is to realize that executing inmates doesn't bring justice for the families. In fact, if you look at studies, it shows that it just extends the trauma, because we're talking about an appeals process that can last decades. So it drags them through this traumatic mud over that course of time. But again, the central question, which I think all sane Oklahomans can agree with, is should we be executing innocent people? Until we can have a system that guarantees no innocents will be executed, then we need to hit the pause button. And I think that's the starting point.
Representative Humphrey, what were your thoughts when Attorney General Drummond declined your request to have DNA retested in the case of Anthony Sanchez?
Well, what Brett said a while ago is that I think all Oklahomans want the same thing. Whether you're for the death penalty or against, you want to make sure, anybody that's sane would want to make sure that we're executing the right person. And again, there was a lot of talk, I don't know evidence, but a lot of talk that the father could be the actual person that was committing these crimes. And again, I think that it's just prudent to run those two and compare those two. That evidence was taken many years ago. We've improved DNA. We should have done that. I disagree with the AG. I understand he's really, really busy. That's not the first time we've disagreed. Probably won't be the last, but I will say this in behalf of our AG. He has stepped up under a lot of heat on some of these death penalty on Rich Glossops and faded the heat and stood strong. And so, he's been probably one of the best we've had, but I still disagree. I think that we should do everything. I think that report that Mr. Farley mentioned a while ago, that we should dust that off, and we should be running legislation to make sure that if we are going to have an execution, that we know 100% that person is the person to be executed, or we should delay that execution. Again, I'm not quite on board with the moratorium yet, but I do believe that there are questions on these cases they ought to be delayed.
What are some other concerns the two of you have heard from people, especially in cases of wrongful conviction?
Well, there are all kinds of problems with the system from beginning to end. You've got prosecutorial misconduct where evidence has been hidden or withheld from the jury, and oftentimes exculpatory evidence. And that certainly was the case in Glenn Simmons' situation with Rich Glossop. And so when we can't have a system where there's confidence in prosecution in the cases that they're putting forward, then it's reason enough to hit the pause button. You also have situations, again, in Rich Glossop's situation where he was not the trigger man. So we have a situation in which the guy who allegedly ordered the murder is on death row and the guy who pulled the trigger is not. That's a real problem. So again, these are just a couple examples of a system that's rife with problems and inconsistencies and injustices. And until we can guarantee that no innocents will be executed, we got to hit the pause button and figure out how to solve these 40-plus problems that the Review Commission identified.
Representative Humphrey, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Well, and again, I think me and Brett's really, really close. The thing about it is we can sit down and have a great conversation, walk away and go eat lunch together, not be mad. We could work together to get things right. And I think that's where, as Oklahomans, we all need to be, is just reasonable. I definitely understand where he's coming from. And really, he's not said anything today that I don't think that anybody with intelligence and Oklahomans would disagree with. We all want to make sure that our systems are correct. And so, again, do we pause and do that? How do we do that? It's a great conversation to have. Where I'm at, I would like to see these prosecutors who, if something gets withheld by mistake or it's questionable whether we can withhold it or not, why would you when a man's life or a woman's life is on the line? But when people do things with criminal intent, with knowingly, willfully, intentionally destroying evidence, knowingly, willfully, intentionally changing testimony, which is again perjury, which is again witness intimidation, or tampering with the witness. All of those are criminal charges. Withholding evidence, like he said, exculpatory evidence. All of that is grossly wrong, and we should be prosecuting the people who do that. We've got people who've spent 20-something years, their life, been on the gurney twice, and again, almost executed because these people committed crimes to get them there so that they could. But why would they do it? I don't even understand. Make themselves look better, further their political career. They took an oath to justice, and those people should be prosecuted. That would send out a big message to other prosecutors, to judges, etc. I think we also have to look at, we've got a cabal going on, whether it's in the pardon board, pro board, whether it's appellate court. Again, when we have the evidence that we've had to show them, and that they have just willfully, ignored the evidence, we've got a problem. And so again, I really do believe that we're going to have to sit down as a state and work these problems out. Should we hit a pause? I'm willing to sit down in these interim studies. I'm willing to talk about that. I'm not there yet, but I will tell you I'm not that far away from it.
Why do you think people are kind of backing away off of the death penalty and looking for a moratorium, especially after In 2016, Oklahoma voters put it into the state constitution.
Well, I think the first point is to recognize the difference in the polls because, and this has been demonstrated over the course of years, including that state question. When you ask people up or down, yes or no, do they support the death penalty, a clear majority do support the death penalty. And I think that's for a few reasons. But when you give them options, life in prison with parole, life in prison without parole, then that support goes down into the 30s, roughly 35%. The poll that we conducted early this year demonstrated, number one, that 77% of Oklahomans support a moratorium, precisely because they don't support executing innocent people. But a clear majority of Oklahomans also don't support the death penalty when they're given options. Again, life in prison with or without parole. So I think it's important to understand those distinctions. When people have options, they're gonna side with prudence, especially given the innocence question.
I agree. Representative Humphrey, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, my answer to that would be a little bit different. I don't necessarily disagree with what Brett said, but here's where I'm at, and I think most people in my district, my area that I talk to, are similar to me. When we watch DOJ, that obviously has become corrupt and political and weaponized. When we watch the FBI, that obviously has become corrupt and politicized. And then when we see cases like Richard Glossop, when we see continual cases, I've got many cases where I can show misconduct by the prosecutors or by a judge, and we're trying to get those investigated. And I believe that the people of the state of Oklahoma have lost confidence in the system, the court system, and I believe it becomes very tough to say, let's execute a person if you have serious doubt in that system. And I think that it's contingent upon us as legislators, upon the court, upon the AG to say, let's become transparent. Let's actually begin to work on these problems. Let's put some of these things that was recommended in place so that we regain the trust of the American people, the Oklahoma people. And I think that that's what we need to do is, before we execute people, let's have 100% that the people know, yes, this is 100% absolutely certain that this person committed such a heinous crime that it does warrant taking their life. And again, I agree with Brett. It doesn't do a lot to deter. And, by the time we get there, you're 20 years down the road. And so really that part of the equation, I don't think really even factors in. But the question is, did the person do such a heinous crime that would warrant him or her giving up their life? And again, putting some closure. And I agree, if you go 20 years, Brett said this a while ago, it extends, that. And so there's a lot of things to talk about and put on the plate. I still support the death penalty. I think most of the district that I represent adamantly supports the death penalty, but we want to make dang sure and get it right. And I think if we have to pause a second to get it right, I think people would rather get it right than get it wrong.
I agree. Guys, we're just about out of time. Is there anything that you guys wanted to add?
Well, I think ultimately, all of us, if we had to deal with a situation where a loved one were murdered in a heinous crime, we would want vengeance. That's human nature. I think ultimately, in order to support the death penalty, again, any sane person is going to have to ask the question, how many innocent people are we willing to execute in order to keep that system running? Because that ultimately is the final question. We know that 11 people have been exonerated. It's likely statistically that we have executed innocent people. So to continue the support for the death penalty, that's a question we have to answer. What's the number? How many innocent people are we willing to execute to justify the system? Most
and that number should
zero.
be, yeah, that number should be zero. That's what
right.
me and you 100% agree on that.
That's
Brett.
right.
And we're in agreement. I do want you to know I appreciate all that you're doing. And, we're going to work together. I think that's what we all have to do is be
Absolutely.
able to have a civil disagreement and to make sure that number, we reach that zero number.
All right, gentlemen, I really appreciate you both for
My
coming
pleasure.
down to talk with us and meeting us via Zoom. Brett Farley, again, Executive Director of the Catholic Conference of Oklahoma, and Representative Justin Humphrey from Lane. Thank you both so much.
Thank both of you. Y'all have a great day.